Room to fill up, and then we'll get started. Great, I think we'll get started now. A very warm welcome to all of our panelists as well as all of our attendees for today's webinar called Africa's Clean Energy Transition, Scaling Up Local Action. We are very proud to be an official side event of London Climate Action Week, which has been going on for the duration of this week. And you can follow along all of the events and activities and the conversation using the hashtag LDN Climate Week or LCAW 2020. This webcast is proudly organized by the Global Wind Energy Council, or GWEC, as well as by REN21. And it's also organized in association with the Revolutionaries Steve Sawyer Memorial Award, which is a program that was launched this year by GWEC, by REN21, and by Greenpeace International to find, identify, and showcase examples of clean energy leadership in emerging markets all around the world. This year, we focused on Africa for our first edition, and we are very lucky to have our winner, as well as many of our shortlisted finalists of the award with us for this webcast today. So I'm just going to go over the order of play for today's webcast. In just a few moments, I'm going to hand the floor over to Mr. Arturo Servos, who's the president of REN21, for some opening remarks. Following these opening remarks, we're going to jump straight into a roundtable, which is chaired by Linda Mungatara, who is the Regional Industry Director of Infrastructure and Natural Resources at the IFC. And with us, as mentioned, are the winner and some of the shortlisted finalists for the Revolutionaries Award, including Chibeze Ezekiel of the Strategic Youth Network for Development in Ghana. We also have Liesel Cassier of the Toyota Wessels Institute for Manufacturing Studies in South Africa. We have Rebecca Shirley from Power for All in Kenya. And we also have our winner of this year's award, Angari of Hivos Foundation in Kenya as well. Following this roundtable, Linda will kindly share a few reflections and some of the emerging insights from the roundtable discussion, and then we'll close out the webcast on the hour. So for now, I'm just going to hand it over to Arturos for a few framing remarks. Arturos, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Joyce. I'm very glad to have the opportunity to introduce this very special panel. The panelists are representing various specialties, renewable energy technologies, market experience, but they have a shared passion to play a leading part in the clean energy transition in their country and in Africa more widely. What brings them together, though, as Joyce said before, is that they were all the finalist candidates for the Revolutionaries, the Steve Sawyer Memorial Award, which recognizes the contributions of young pioneers of renewable energy in developing countries, in honor of the life's work and legacy of Steve Sawyer, former Secretary General for Global Wind Energy Council, founding member of REN21, and Executive Director of Greenpeace International. Steve has always been very keen in helping and advising young pioneers. I have met a lot of people around the world, many of them not so young anymore, who are considering Steve as their mentor. Each of our panelists was deemed by the award jury to have a strong track record of leadership, advancing renewable energy, and engaging in activities which reflect innovation, scalability, and diversity. They are bringing these qualities to the most important challenge of our time, which is responding to the climate emergency and mitigating global warming. Renewable energy is fundamental in this process, and Africa has a tremendous opportunity to develop its vast renewable energy resources so as to contribute to the continent's resilient, prosperous, and sustainable development. The young generation of professionals and pioneers can play a critical role in the acceleration of the energy transition and the expansion of energy access in the continent. On behalf of REN 21, a founding partner of the Revolutionaries Award, it is a pleasure to open the panel and give the floor and this debate to the next generation of clean energy leaders in Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Arturos, for those wonderful remarks about Steve, as well as the scene-setting remarks for the important discussion that we're having today. At this point, let's get things started, and we'll hand it over now to Linda from IFC, who can provide a few agenda-setting remarks of her own before introducing each of our panelists. So, Linda, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Joyce. I'm Linda Mungatara. I'm the Director for Infrastructure for Africa and the Middle East for the IFC. It is such an honor for me to be here today to host this very important event. I think, energy transition, clean energy transition, and also how we mobilize youth are really, sort of top of agenda for all of us. I personally believe that if we're going to be successful in our green energy quest and of providing reliable, affordable energy to all of our Africans, hopefully, we really have to use all our resources, all the resources that we have at our disposal. And for me, that also includes the youth. I was actually quite shocked when I asked for somebody to give me the statistics on, the youth representation on the continent. And I was told that 60% of the youth, 60% of our population is under 24 years of age. And 74% of our population is actually under the age of 35. I think that shows you that if we actually ignore this important segment of our population, we really, only have ourselves to blame, because we will not be tapping into the resources that are available to us from the continent. So we really need to encourage and support young pioneers in this RE space, because that's the only way we're actually going to leapfrog what the rest of the world has done already. And I'm a firm believer in not repeating the mistakes that somebody else has, graciously learned for us. We should really just, try and see how we can, jump on the technologies that are now available to us. Today's panelists are already working to address a lot of the challenges that we are grappling with today, and to discuss how we can scale up Africa's energy transition. I am pleased to say that I'm joined by 4 young clean energy pioneers working in Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa. They represent the public sector, the private sector, civil society, and academia, and share one particular thing in common, which, as we've said earlier on, is renewable energy. They are champions of the RE agenda and energy efficiency in their spaces, and I'm really pleased to see that we've got such bright young people taking leadership roles in this very important sector. So I would like to welcome each of the panelists, and I will introduce them by name and then ask them to say 1 or 2 words about themselves by way of introduction, and maybe a statement in terms of just framing how they fit into the RE space. So I'll start with Chibeze Ezekiel, who is the executive coordinator of the Strategic Youth Network for Development. This is an NGO that is focused on youth inclusion in the governance of the natural resources and environmental sector. Chibeze, can you say a few words, please?
Thank you, Linda, and good afternoon to all my colleague panelists and the invitees. Well, like Linda said, I am Chibeze. I am based in Accra, Ghana. I basically lead the youth movement, in promoting renewable energy in Ghana. We were able to succeed to stop the establishment of coal plant in Ghana, and to demonstrate that renewable energy is a better alternative as compared to coal. So since then, we've been promoting renewable energy as a better alternative. So I'll be happy to share experiences from a youth perspective in terms of how to upscale renewable energies in Ghana. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chibeze. I'm going to move to Liesel Cassier, who is the head of green manufacturing research at the Toyota Vessels Institute of Manufacturing Studies in Durban, South Africa. She's worked for the KwaZulu-Natal provincial government as chair of the Provincial Renewable Energy Working Group on a series of projects to bring together private and public stakeholders to unlock opportunities in the renewable energy, such as the establishment of the KwaZulu-Natal Renewable Energy Fund and a local energy trading agency. Liesel.
Thanks very much, Linda. And yeah, it's great to be here and great to be amongst some of these great panelists that have been chosen. Yeah, I think I've spent the last 12 years in the green renewable space. So I have a real passion and love for it. And I think my career has spanned over government and research. And I think one thing that really strikes me is it's a fight against path dependencies. And I think it links back to your comment about the youth in Africa, 70% being under 35 years of age, which I think is something we really need to tap into, because they would not have kind of come through these kind of entrenched path dependencies. And that's really probably one of the strengths that Africa has. So looking forward to the discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Liesel. I'm going to move to Dr. Rebecca Shirley, who is the Chief of Research at Power for All, where she works to create widespread public access to critical energy data and insights. Rebecca's research explores innovative and collaborative approaches to energy service delivery. Rebecca was featured as an ESI, Africa Power and Energy Leader in 2019, and was named Africa Utility Week's 2018 Outstanding Young Leader in Energy. So really quite an esteemed member of our panel today, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Linda, and thank you so much to the GWEC team for having me. Hello to all of the participants. It's such a pleasure to be here with this group. As Linda said, I'm the Chief of Research at Power for All, and have been doing work in the renewable energy space for the past 15 years. And really what we try to do, as Linda said, is basically to help solve both the data access challenge, but also the data use challenge. We find that, of course, there's a large dearth of data that can help to inform policy for renewable energy development, but also there's a lot of data that we have access to that we might not be using as effectively or as efficiently as we can. And so that's what we really see our role as, is to help users all across the board, whether those are policymakers, whether those are government administrators, whether those are companies themselves, be able to abstract or distill insight from the existing data and do additional research where we find that can have value. And on your note, Linda, about the percentage of youth or the percentage youth population, we've recently done a study on jobs creation in the renewable energy sector that shows that for at least the small scale renewable energy sector, about 40% of those persons employed are below the age of 24. So what that says to me is that there's already, the sector is seeing that there's really a lot of benefit, a lot of opportunity for youth involvement. And another thing that came out of that study is that there is a lot of job opportunity that needs workforce development such that those positions can be filled. So I'd love to talk more about that today in the session. And I really think that this topic of youth engagement in the clean transition is spot on.
Excellent, thank you. I love the fact that we can, find a way to green our continent and at the same time provide employment. And I think those are two really hot topics for the continent. So really glad to have you on the panel. And last but not least, I want to go to Angari Muchiri, a program development manager at Hivos Foundation based in Nairobi, Kenya, where she's currently developing an energy access pilot program to create solar-based microgrid ecosystems across Africa using blockchain technology. Angari was the inaugural winner of the Revolutionaries. So really pleased to actually have one of the previous winners here today. And in 2019, she was selected as one of the Obama Leaders for Africa by the Obama Foundation. So really, as you all can see, this is quite an accomplished set of panelists. So Angari, over to you for a couple of words, please.
Thank you so much, Linda, and thank you for that really kind introduction. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to be among my fellow panelists, these amazing people that I really look up to. So thank you so much. In order to scale the local action in renewable energy in Africa, we need bold diversity, and it's something that we say at HEVOS. Bold in diversity is a big thing, strong leadership and sustainability. And I think one of the ways, as has already been highlighted, is the inclusion of youth, but also the inclusion of women in these programs. And the one thing I want to really highlight, and Linda and Rebecca have already also alluded to this, also, is that Africa is the youngest continent in the world, right? But also 50% of our population is women. So we need to find a way to bring this diversity into designing these energy systems, because we cannot have energy systems that are designed by one demographic. In addition to that, I think we need to ensure that we have knowledge hubs and case studies that are accessible to everybody, so that people can actually see what the potential to leapfrog these traditional energy systems to renewable energy is. And there are great projects already on the continent that are achieving this. I have a bit more to say, but I think we only have a few minutes, so I'll stop there, and then I'm happy to talk about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Angari. I'll definitely give you an opportunity to share a little bit more shortly. But just want to re-emphasize the point that you made on gender, and actually, making sure that we don't leave the women behind as we address the energy issue. Really very important. So let me start by asking Chibeze in terms of just trying to lay the land for some of these topics that we are all grappling with. I wanted to understand from you, Chibeze, being somebody that is working with youth and in youth development, what is the value of youth being active in the renewable energy space regarding public campaigning, activism, and work? Where do you see the youth coming in and fitting into this whole agenda?
Well, thank you once again, Linda, for this opportunity. I think that we all do acknowledge that we have more young people on our continent. But unfortunately, we tend to underutilize the skills and the abilities young people possess. Interestingly, young people don't have, for now, at least in Africa, the political will, the state resources, but it cannot be debated that young people have the skills, the energy, the talent, and the ability that can be harnessed to push the renewable energy agenda. So I'll give you one key example. All over the world, anytime we come out with some of these global conventions and protocols, we make provision for awareness creation, education, training, and sensitization. But I think this is one area where young people brings value to some of these global discussions. So young people, today are dominating social media, so which means that they have what it takes to contribute to when it comes to awareness creation on renewable energy and to upscale the demand for renewable energy, not only in Ghana, but also in Africa. One other value that they bring on board is that once they create awareness, once they create education, it triggers the demand side. So when the population begins to demand for renewable energy, having heard about it, then that will also compel or become a form of motivation or incentive for government or the private sector to now invest into renewable energy. Because of course, every investor wants to be guaranteed or assured that the investment will bring in the profit that they expect. So when young people trigger the demand side, then that can also encourage the government side or the private sector to invest more into renewable energy, because they are rather assured that there's a market prepared to absorb their services. So to give you a key example, what you are doing now is that SOND now has formed what I call the Youth Renewable Energy Movement. So just to create more awareness renewable energy, so to bring all the players in Ghana to ensure that we're also contributing to the achievement of our renewable energy plan in Ghana. We also have a sister organization called the 350 GROC, Ghana Reducing Our Carbon. They have actually taken it down to the local level. In Ghana, we have what we call the district assemblies. I think in Kenya, they call it counties. So we believe that development actually takes place at the local level. So what this youth group is doing is that they are also engaging the local government structures to incorporate or mainstream renewable energy into their respective medium-term development plans. So once their assemblies are able to incorporate that into their plans, then at the end of the day, we can also demonstrate as a country or at the assembly level how they are contributing to upscaling of renewable energy in Ghana. So not only are we creating awareness, but we are neck deep into the process by engaging assemblies, helping them to put in, as part of the annual plans to ensure that at the end of the day, the assembly can also report on how they are doing when it comes to renewable energy. So basically, these are some few thoughts I want to share as part of my initial remarks on the value that young people bring on renewable energy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beze. And I think one important aspect that you touched on was about, how do we turn this into something that is demand-driven as opposed to just supply-driven? Because I think for the longest time we are looking at supply and we're not really, studying and trying to understand the demand side of it. And I think it's, that's a pretty important aspect that you bring in. And I'm going to turn to Liesel and ask her, linked to that, how can we move the ambition of clean energy beyond the power sector? And really make it a demand-driven conversation?
Yeah, thanks, Linda. That's a great question, and I'll probably just talk to it from where I'm at the moment, which is dealing with industry and manufacturing. So I think there's two kind of parts to that question, and I think the first one would be around linking it to the broader carbon emissions kind of discussion. So what we're finding is that if you look at the overall carbon budget, 55% comes from the way we produce energy and 45% is from how we manufacture and produce goods and services. So turning it to a demand kind of led discussion, what we're finding, and you'll also see a lot of the post-COVID type EU funding that's coming out, is that there's going to be increasingly a focus on companies and manufacturers accounting for how they are producing their goods and services. So it's not so much going to be a power sector debate anymore, but it's going to be companies saying, well, we're going to get penalized on our products and services if we don't have a green kind of source of energy. And that's the bulk of where kind of the CO2 emissions are emanating from. So I think from that point of view, you're probably going to see individual companies kind of pushing for this more and more as that pressure from the kind of carbon side intensifies. And I think that the second element is that I want to talk to is around cost competitiveness. So I think if you were to take this discussion a few years back, the argument was very much around renewables is the right thing to do. And that's still very much applicable. But if you look at it from kind of a levelized cost of electricity point of view now, it really does make business sense. And in many cases, it is actually the cheapest form of energy that you can be using. So I think just on that basis, you're probably going to see an increase in the kind of demand led type developments. And then the last point I want to make there, and it's maybe just a question for everyone to throw out there, is that, is it right to take a systems approach, or is it right to take an individual approach to renewables? And what I mean there is that, there's a lot of extenuating issues that need to be discussed in developing a renewable energy kind of sector. And is it to be done at a national type policy level, or do you want individual kind of companies driving the agenda? So that's maybe something, if we have time, that we could discuss further. But those would be my kind of contributions to that question.
Thank you, Liesel. And hopefully we can come back to the very important question on policy, because I think that is important, and that will definitely frame the way we roll out renewable energies on the continent. I wanted to just pick up on a couple of the points that you made, and perhaps turn to Rebecca to help address those. You mentioned the fact that obviously renewable energy is really not going to be just about the power sector. The other issue was, the cost perceptions. I think for a long time now, and rightly so, I think up until recently, the cost of renewable has been fairly high and, prohibitive. And I think that has changed. So the question that I have for you, Rebecca, is for local communities, what is the experience with how renewable energy is perceived. So basically looking at it as, what is the reality of the business case versus sort of the myths of the past? Are we past all of those preconceptions about RE, or are we still, needing to do a lot of local education to get buy-in?
Thanks, Linda, and it's a good question. I think that's definitely, renewables, that sector is becoming more mainstream. You're seeing this in the news, in sort of, popular spaces of media and information consumption. And we're all sort of well aware that many African countries are in the midst of an energy transition, as utility scale solar, as utility scale wind, geothermal power, all begin to displace diesel generation. And of course, as battery storage systems make headway, and as rural electrification receives growing attention. And in fact, I think, something that's also becoming more mainstream is the fact that right now electricity access across the continent is standing at about 35% of the population. So meaning a full 65% of those on the continent do not have access to electricity, and rural electrification rates are embedded in that. And so that's about a third the rates of urban communities. So what we're seeing is, I think, more attention, or at least not more, but a broadening of the sort of the scope of what we mean by renewables and access to renewables. And so we're seeing now more of these types of smaller scale renewable energy technologies coming on stream. We have, I think, about 4,000 mini grids, solar hybrid or otherwise, in different stages of development across the entire continent. And Gogla would say that just in the first 6 months of last year, there were well over 4 million quality certified solar lanterns, multi-light solar home systems, in distribution and sales. So all of that to say that I think that the perception is changing, and that these technologies are becoming a bit more stream, especially as we're understanding the need to reach communities where they are. What I would say though, while I think renewables are, hitting the mark in terms of reliability and in terms of accessibility, a lot of these companies, have really fantastic last mile programs to reach communities at the most remote spaces. One area where we're still challenged is around affordability. And whether we're talking about the cost of a mini grid connection, the cost of a solar home system, the deposit for a solar home system, the payments over a 2-year period for solar home systems, the cost of solar lanterns, these things are definitely still beyond the reach of many persons in especially these rural communities that we're speaking about. And then also, Liesel was making the point about sort of expanding, or I think somebody was making the point about this needing to be demand driven rather than supply driven. And I think if we even just step outside of the renewable energy space and look at where a lot of the development is happening right now, for instance, from milk chillers to oil pressers, maize millers, honey processing, ice making, all of cold storage, there's a lot of work happening right now in the renewable energy meets agriculture space. That's just to give one example of an SDG area where we're seeing a lot of nexus activity. And these technologies are likewise, really fantastic in terms of their technical capabilities, but far outside of the reach of Uganda and Kenya. So we have this situation where we've got an addressable market. And some estimates put that at as much as $11 billion in terms of total market size, but the serviceable market, meaning those that are actually able to pay for such services, boils down to something like 200 million. So I think that there's this massive gap that still stands in terms of affordability, and that then becomes an equity challenge. It becomes an adjustment towards a clean energy future. This business case, as you said, we really need to think about how do we address consumer financing and drive support to the consumer level such that these business models are sustainable and make sense for everyone.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And that was really quite a packed response, quite a lot of issues and things that we have to grapple with, and things that we have to think about. It's not just about providing the power, it's about the affordability issue. It's about, how will the guy in the street be able to pay for this? How do they access funding to be able to install, a solar heating system, for example? So I really think that, these are, important questions for us to actually answer. I'm going to pick up on one of them, which, is close to my heart as well. You mentioned the fact that there's only, access to power is only to 35% of the populace of the continent, which is quite shocking. If you think, in 2020, we're sitting in a situation where, a significant part of our population has no access to power. It's just unacceptable, which means that, if we're trying to fight the poverty gap, it just keeps widening, because you really can't fight it effectively if you don't provide power to people. So with that, Wangari, this is something you're working on access to some extent. And I'm curious to understand from you, what do you think it will take for us to increase access to clean, reliable, and affordable power to most people?
Thank you so much, Linda, for that question. And that's a really packed question. I'm sure we can actually have a full webinar on just that question. But I think I'm going to just kind of break it down into a few things and just relate it to the work that I'm doing now at HEVOS. And what I would say is it would take three Ds, right? The first one would be to diversify the solutions. So when we're looking at diversifying the solutions, we're not talking about just people, as I've alluded to in my opening statement, saying we need more women and more youth on the teams designing this renewable energy systems, but we also need to diversify the technologies that we're using. So what is the best energy or technology for each region? And we can't blanket and say solar is great all across Africa because we have great sun. There might be some areas where geothermal is more cost effective or wind is more cost effective. So in terms of that, diversifying that portfolio of energy in Africa, we need to really look at the different technologies, look at what's really applicable and available to us, what is the least cost as well, and then go from there. And then in addition to that, the other diversify is the one of people. So look at the grassroots solutions that already exist. There are people on the ground with amazing, innovative ideas and projects that are already there, but they probably can't scale them up because of lack of funding. And so we need to look at those solutions as well and see what is available in the different contexts that we're looking at. The second D that I would refer to is the decentralization of energy systems. And we spoke about demand, but the least cost of electricity is where it's produced, right? So it's cheaper to use electricity where it's produced. And so if you want to, let's say, run a grain mill or power a flour refrigerator system, or even just provide energy to a house, a small house or a school, the least cost is when it's produced at where it's used. And so if we can decentralize a lot of these energy systems, these traditional legacy systems that we have all across the board in Africa, that will bring the cost down quite a bit, because then you remove that transmission component as well as introduce what's the best for that region. And then the last D that I would refer to is to demonopolize a lot of the energy systems. And I'll give an example. Here in Kenya, we only have one utility. And so that really, all the energy really is fed into this one utility. But if we were able to open that up and have people, in the case that we're working on, in the project we're working on in Kajiado County, where we're looking to have people trading energy between themselves, then energy would be democratized, and then you'd have somebody borrowing or buying energy from their neighbor, like they'll borrow a cup of sugar. And that's really, really important to have energy access that easy and that quick on the continent, given how fast we're growing. So those are the 3 Ds I'd refer to. I'll stop there, but yeah, definitely, I think those are the important ones we need to look at.
Thanks, Angari. So I think you've spoken about really bringing energy down to the grassroots, and I think part of it is also moving away from centralized systems to distributed generation, microgrids, and so on, which really enables you to literally buy energy from your neighbor. It would be fantastic if that were possible. But I think part of the problem that we face is that for the longest time, I think energy has been sort of a sector that is left to a few people from a skills and technology perspective. And I don't think, the sector has been opened up enough to encourage wholesale participation, if I can use that word. So going back to Jibeze and the fact that, we've already agreed at the start of this conversation that youth make up the greatest part of our population, and that if we actually don't leverage them and we don't use them, we are going to fall short. So my question to you is, how can policymakers ensure that the next generation of energy leaders is being trained and skilled to lead the delivery of renewable energy to our markets?
Thank you once again, Linda. I just want to establish, some decisions made by policymakers or government, if you like. In fact, if you read Article 11 of the African Youth Charter, it makes a clear provision that young people must actively participate in the decision-making process. When it comes to Ghana, we have our national youth policy that also makes reference to the African Youth Charter that young people must also participate when it comes to decision-making process. And I want to believe that this cuts across in all the African countries. So we have that provision in our policies that young people are active agents when it comes to the development agenda. So we have that in place. So what is lacking is how to actualize or implement that particular provision in our policies. So what I believe is that the state must provide the enabling environment and bring young people to the table and to have their views and their opinions heard. Usually it's said that young people are usually rowdy, they are very aggressive. Normally when it comes to war, when it comes to fighting, young people are involved. So they seem to be delinked from national development processes as a result of that. But we are seeing increasingly that young people all over the world, in Africa, globally, are making conscious effort when it comes to development agenda. So it shows that indeed young people also have what it takes to support the process. So one is about having the right enabling environment, bring them to the table to share their views and their concerns. For example, in Ghana, our Renewable Energy Master Plan says that they want to create about 220,000 jobs by 2030. So the question is, how then do we bring young people to the table? If it's about jobs, it's about young people. Are we taking into consideration their ideas? Can they develop some apps? Can they have, so all those processes have to be put in place. So my response to that, let's bring them to the table and for them to present what they think they can do in support of that. The other window of opportunity is the ongoing NDCs, that's the nationally determined contributions, which is one of the requirements of the Paris Climate Agreement, where countries are supposed to determine how they intend to contribute to the 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees target. So every country has the NDCs. And in Ghana, we have a chunk aspect which talks about renewable energy. So those are entry points for young people when it comes to the use of solar, when it comes to rooftop mobilization, when it comes to the issue of clean cooking stoves. These are all avenues where we think young people can be involved in. So as we plan the NDCs, again, that presents an entry point to engage young people to get their views on how they can present it. Fortunately, parties to the Paris Climate Agreement have an opportunity to revise or review their respective NDCs. And in Ghana, we are actually in the process of reviewing our NDCs, hopefully to be done by the first quarter of next year, then to be submitted to the UNFCCC. So what we are doing in Ghana is that we have actually formed a youth group on our national adaptation plan process and our NDCs. And we are presenting a paper, a strategy to government on how young people can be involved when it comes to our climate action plans as far as renewables are concerned. So that's what we are doing in our own small way. So it's about the enabling environment, bringing them to the table, and finding an entry point for them, in the decision-making process. I believe that once we are able to exhaust these plans, then young people can see that, okay, that they have been appreciated, they have been recognized, and that will even motivate them to present more, or contribute more to the process. So I think that these are some of the avenues how policymakers can bring young people to the table. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you so much. And it seems to me that Ghana is really quite active in sort of and being proactive in getting youth involved in the energy sector, and that's really commendable. And I do hope that we can share the lessons across and not just that they just won't be in Ghana. I think there's a lot of countries. In fact, all of our countries can benefit from learning what have been the success factors in terms of your implementation in Ghana, and what are the pitfalls, and also just helping in terms of planning that youth engagement. I still want to stick to the policy discussion and go back to Liesel. And just, we talked a little bit just now about the Paris Agreement and, the objectives and the targets. And again, I think it comes back to the point of, if we just limit this just to the power sector, we will not get there, and we will not reach our clean energy targets. So it really is about bringing everyone along and making sure that everyone plays a part. Now, Liesel, in terms of, so I just wanted to ask you that, what is your perception, or what do you think is the role of policymakers in incentivizing companies and industries to adopt renewable energy and green practices?
Okay, thanks. That's quite a loaded question. So I'll start somewhere. I think, the stock standard answer would always be that policymakers need to create a market. And I think it goes back to Angari's point earlier, that across Africa, we kind of coming from a power sector that's been very monopolistic and kind of very controlled. So it's been really hard for renewable energy to break through, and it links back to what I said at the beginning, that path dependency. So I think the key role for policymakers is to open up the market for, the adoption of renewable energy. But having said that, I also think it's critical for policymakers to ensure that everyone is brought along. And this goes back to that discussion we had around decentralization of energy supply. And if I can talk to the South African example, when I was at the CSR, we actually looked at the impact of decentralized energy on, for example, municipalities who have historically kind of made their revenue from the sales of electricity. And that is used to kind of cross-subsidize a whole lot of other developmental kind of spend. So there is kind of this debate around, if we promote decentralization to the cost of kind of municipal kind of targets and goals, and what that does to other developmental agendas within Africa. So I think the key for policy making is to make sure that we kind of address all these issues and bring everyone along. And that's what I said at the beginning, is that, ideally you'd want a national system that is renewable energy focused and incorporates everyone, so that you don't have, what they call like the utility death spirals. And I think that's like a lot of the discussion that's been had around the just transition. Then I think at a company level, it's one of my kind of passions is measurement. If we get the correct measurement of things, the green will follow. And I think very often things like energy, water, they're almost the hidden resources, which companies only acknowledge when it's not there, and in South Africa, we've coming from a load shedding background at the moment. So I think, that's when you realize the value of energy. And I think from a policy perspective, if we can ensure that, for example, energy is valued correctly or measured correctly at a company level, then, the adoption and the take-up will be that much easier. So I think those are my kind of responses to that question.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm just going to break the flow a little bit. I know that in my earlier round I went to Rebecca, but I'm going to go to Angari, because I think this relates a little bit to what Liesel has been talking about, and it's really is about policymakers and inclusiveness, measurements and so on. So Angari, I just wanted to understand from you, or at least get your thoughts on what you think companies and policymakers can do to enable gender inclusive RE. We spoke earlier on that women comprise at least 50% of the population. So in as much as we don't want to leave the youth behind, we also don't want to leave women behind.
Yes, certainly, that's true, and there's a lot of things that need to be done urgently on the continent for us to have inclusive policies, gender inclusive policies in this renewable energy sector. I'll start at the policy level, and then I'll touch on the company level later. But I think initially, one really interesting fact that I read the other day was that only 18% of countries globally have gender keywords in their renewable energy policies. So 18% is really not so good. And so if we can have more policymakers really taking into account that those gender keywords, instead of saying mankind, mankind, say humankind, things like that. These are very small, sensitive things that really start to push the conversation to a more gender neutral and gender inclusive kind of inclusive sector. So one of the first things I'd say is to have policies that are gender sensitive and to have that language in there, which is quite important for policymakers to consider. The second thing I would say is, and this is very important, especially when it comes to the question of youth, as Chibeze talked about before, is embedding sustainability in our education. When you think about our future, renewable energy is going to be what powers Africa in a sustainable way. It's on the trajectory upwards, but it's nowhere in any of our curriculums. We don't talk about it up until people are in university. That is, we're kind of setting ourselves up for failure in that regard. And so if we start embedding sustainability and renewable energy in children as young as 5 years old, then that becomes intrinsic in them, becomes inherent in how they think. And so when they grow up, they start to build systems that are sustainable, that are renewable, and that are green. And that it becomes a no-brainer at that point. And as we've already said, if 74% of our population is under 30 years old, we have a lot of potential to work on. So in terms of the policy level, that's what I would suggest kindly to all the policymakers here on the call. In terms of on company level, there's a few things that I think are really important. The first one I would say is mentoring. You can't really be what you can't see. And if you're trying to get young women, youth into these renewable energy positions, they need to see people that they can emulate who are in those positions. So they need to see engineers that are women. They need to see engineers that are young in those positions so that they can be able to say, okay, I can be like that. I'm interested in this field. If you find that a lot of women, let's say, are caterers, then more women will go into the catering field, and they won't, look at these STEM subjects that normally are typically male fields. So we need to change that. We need to really change that, how people look at that on a company level. We also need to have a lot of training for women, and I mean not at a company level. I mean not just general training on running a company, but technical training. Do we take female engineers to actually get technical training to upgrade their skills? Because that's important. That gives them the confidence they need to really make a change in the industry. And then the last thing that I would also say is to have appropriate policies at a company level as well. Because if you have appropriate policies such as flexible working or job sharing or things that will encourage women, let's say who are on that age of childbearing, to be able to work and have it easier at your company, then they'll want to stay longer, they'll want to grow longer. And I say this even highlighting, let's say, the company I work for. I had a child 8 weeks ago, and because of the flexibility that I'm allowed at HIVOS, I want to stay at HIVOS because it's encouraged to be a woman, and you don't feel like you have to hide or you have to, kind of take away from the fact that you've had a child, and you can still be a brilliant engineer in that sense. So I think we need to see more companies doing that. We need to see more companies encouraging their women to do that as well. And that will increase the gender inclusivity in the sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Angari, and congratulations on your baby. Only 2 months old, and here you are. So really, you are a true trailblazer. And I take your point on, women need to see, familiar role models. And I think we just need to look at the screen right now. This panel has got, some trailblazing women. So I think we can actually even start here in terms of, pointing our younger, youth to, women that are really, making a mark in the renewable energy space. And I really want to take my hat off to you ladies for taking this path. And it's not to diminish the role that Chibeze is playing, because that is also, really critical. And I'm really loving, hearing about the work that you're doing with the youth. It was actually quite interesting to hear also Angari and Liesel speak about, company level type issues. And, Wangari spoke about, education and making sure that we teach sustainable education at a young age. And I think if we did that, we would actually accomplish Liesel's role of, making sure that we actually measure our resources, because you can't measure what you don't know. But I think if we actually had the mindset of sustainability, that measurement would actually just come naturally. It doesn't come naturally now, because we've never, I think we've not grown up thinking sustainability, well, at least, I think in my generation. So I think the youth are definitely growing up thinking sustainability. So hopefully all of that will start filtering into companies and spread broader than the energy sector. And Rebecca, I just want to come back to you, because we're talking about women and youth, and this is really the segment of the market that typically has no access to finance, and the struggle to get funding of any sort. We know that Africa doesn't really have a shortage of funding. It's got a shortage of projects and a shortage of implementation of good ideas. So how can we ensure that the green recovery and all the money that is going to green recovery, stimulus funding that is going to, RE, how do we make sure that it actually reaches some of these local players, people at the grassroots, the women and the youth?
Thanks again, Linda, and a very great question. And it's an important question to me. We've been tracking, our team has been tracking COVID relief response for the past 8 months. And it's quite interesting to see that basically a problem that has plagued the sector since its nascency, really, and one that I think, if we're being honest, is more systemic and beyond renewable energy, is this imbalance between local and foreign funding. And in fact, a report came out by Gogla just a few weeks ago that found that of all of the funds committed to the renewable energy or decentralized renewable energy space of 2020, 75% of those investment commitments went to 3 international companies. And so that's just a telling statistic of really where we are at in terms of this divide between local and foreign funding. And this is important because what our research shows, I was telling you before about this research that we did on jobs, we did a broad census to the decentralized renewable energy sector, both in Kenya and in Nigeria. What we found is that local companies are really critical. They are employing high percentages of youth and women. They are more equitable in terms of compensation across the hierarchy of the company. And they're creating what are deemed long-term job opportunities. So the average retention time is about 30 months for these types of companies, where the industry standard is much lower. So I think supporting local companies it's important. And to your question about how to ensure that we help to support local companies, I'd say 3 things. One, I'm going to talk about a topic that Liesel spoke about a little bit earlier, which is, the fact that a lot of the impact-driven concessional finance is really what's been the lifeblood of the sector for quite a while. And here, investors really have the opportunity to incentivize companies the way that they see fit. And so encouraging companies to draw on and understand those linkages between energy access, whether I'm a mini-grid company or solar home system company, whatever the case is, to understand the linkages between what I'm selling or what my service is, and how customers are able to use that productively, whether that is in agriculture, whether that is in commercial and industrial enterprise, whether that is in education, whether that is in health. Being able to understand those linkages and then draw that back into the impact framework for funding is really critical, so that we're really not just funding connections, we're funding use of energy. That's number one. Number two, what I would say is coming back to the question that I answered earlier on, and the sort of, the fact that when we're talking about energy, we're also talking about activity in all of these other sectors. I really hope that we have some non-energy policymakers on the phone, because I think one area of providing support to the energy sector is incidentally providing support to other sectors. So if we see finance in the agriculture sector, finance in trade, finance in health, those things are going to trickle back into the energy sector. What do I mean by that? If we have, for instance, in Uganda, there's a fantastic scheme right now that the Ministry of Agriculture has put together for rebates on imported agricultural equipment like mills and so on. When people, or when farmers, or when farmer cooperatives and associations leverage those types of subsidies, they then become users or consumers of power, and then that impacts the ability of these mini grid companies and so on to recoup their costs, and then that lowers that reduces the amount of time it takes for them to recoup their investment and brings down the cost of power for everybody. So there's a very circuitous cycle here. Likewise, we're seeing in Kenya support for the e-cooking sector. We're seeing support for the SME sector. And I think that kind of activity is really important, as I said, to sort of have an indirect effect on the cost and affordability of electricity itself. And then finally, what I would say is that another way that investors can help to support more localized use of funds is simply through supporting and developing the workforce. What our research has shown is that there is a major gap between jobs needed or workforce needs of the sector and what is coming through the recruitment pipeline. This is not a situation where we have a lack of talent. The recruitment pipelines and being able to connect graduates and trainees to companies is really an area where I think our universities, our TVET institutions need to step up to the bat. And investors can definitely help to support recruitment initiatives. They can help to support training programs within companies. They can help to support and ensure that this type of training is available in rural communities where we're seeing that the jobs are actually needed. So these are ways that I think we generally don't hear about. We often talk about investment in generation, and that's great. But there are all of these other very diverse and innovative ways that investors can help support the renewable energy sector and localize the sector at the same time.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And I think, it goes to show that we could continue this discussion for quite some time. And really, we've run out of time, and unfortunately, we have to wrap it up. But let me maybe leave you with two words, or maybe two key takeaways from my perspective, and to sort of follow Rebecca's example of data. If we continue as we are, by 2030, 90% of the population that has no access to energy will be in Africa. That is a daunting fact. And then the other issue that I wanted to sort of leave you all with is that we've got so much wind and solar resource in Africa. And we've barely scratched the surface in terms of tapping into that. I think we only account for 1% of wind energy, for example, in the entire world, which is totally unacceptable. But this has been a very interesting conversation. It obviously shows that we need to figure out how to leverage our youth. And really, thank you so much to the panelists for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda. I think on behalf of all of us, we can agree this was masterful chairing on your part, and we so appreciate your time and your facilitation of what's been a very interesting and dynamic conversation about lots of different cross-cutting issues. Really great to have the diversity of different technologies, different genders, different markets, different approaches and disciplines represented here on this panel. So I think I would agree with your last two remarks. Those are very strong reminders to leave us all with. I think that the two key themes that came out for me were incentives. So incentivizing policymakers to act, ensuring that we're constantly focusing on leveraging the changing of perceptions, leveraging the new commitments, leveraging the opportunity we have with green recovery as well, incentivizing corporates and non-state actors to ensure that they're making the switch to green energy, and using market design incentives to make sure that we are creating more sustainable energy systems, pushing polluting fuels off the grid and replacing those with renewable energy. And then the second theme would be empowerment. I think there were a lot of really wonderful remarks made about mainstreaming gender into policies and into the kind of bedrock of how policy is made, not just in the energy sector, but I think writ large, as well as empowering youth to act, because I think the big takeaway here is that these are the next generation of leaders who will be shaping our future. So my thanks again to Linda and Arturos for being with us today, as well as to each of our panelists for sharing your insights with our audience. I think as a final reminder, just to note that we do have this webcast recorded. There was quite a lot of ground covered today. So if you would like to rewatch it, then it will be available on the GWEC YouTube channel. And with that, I think we can close the webcast. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.